That morning, the classroom was already filled to the brim. Several teachers of the academy were gathered there for no reason at all. Powerful mages always had too much free time at their disposal. Suddenly, a youth walked in. He was handsome and unrestrained, exuding an aura of confidence that made evident him being a peerless genius. His presence became more overbearing with every step. Dear heavens, who is that youth of unparalleled manliness? The female students were of course top-tier beauties, wearing long chipaos that revealed ample part of their generous bosom and let them show their long jade-like legs from the side slit. Soon, blood rushed to the face and the most private parts of the young and pure maidens, making them bloom like red roses. The handsome youth was, of course, Lith, our protagonist. His black, silky hair moved with each stride. His smile was filled with nothing but unrestrained power. He knew that in that small world, he was peerless beyond reason. Dazzled by his appearance, the professors decided to test his wits, so see if such overbearing talent really belonged to a true genius. "What do you think about the Tao of magic, young master?" said an old man whose beard almost reached the floor. Such an easy question. Lith's boundless self-confidence filled the whole room with admired gasps. He was the kind of man that every woman wanted and every man wanted to be. He who strikes first strikes twice. Buy low, sell high. His reply made the male audience turn green with envy. So young, yet so wise and knowledgeable about Taoism and philosophy. He truly understands the Tao. Heavens don't have eyes, why him? He is just common or trash. Why it couldn't be me? I come from the insert pompous name here family. We have hundreds of years of artifacts and legacies, yet I am nothing compared to him, everyone thought. The female audience, instead, had already fallen head over heels for him. All that they could think about was how to capture his manly heart and how many children of him they wanted to bear in their wombs. But Lith hadn't finished yet. "The cat is on the table. It's 9:15. Those simple words revealed a profound and unfathomable wisdom. Soon the professors realized that it would take them years to understand the truth about the Tao that was hidden behind those words. At the same time, the female audience raised the baby count by 1, some even by 3. They were healthy young ladies, after all. Soon, the evil, envious prince from the powerful Envy family couldn't take it anymore. "You are courting death," he bellowed. He moved with unbelievable speed, arriving in front of Lith in the blink of an eye. He was the most nondescript character one could imagine. The only defining trait he had was a t-shirt saying, "Hi, I'm the bad guy. You trash, how dare you taint this sacred halls with your presence? Kowtow to me 9 times and call me your grandpa, and I promise I will not kill you." The professors gasped. They were all archmages, hundreds of years old. But what was their pride, the school honor, not to mention nonsense like the rules of the kingdom in front of that youth? Read latest chapters at enrolment. He was Prince Bad Guy from the Envy family, whose power they didn't dare to offend. So, like the archmages they were, they squealed some pathetic excuse and hid in the background. Poor Lith, he is destined to die. No one can offend the Envy family and live to tell the tale. They thought as one. Lith was unaffected by both his words and t-shirt. "You are just a side character, Scram." With a wave of his hand, Lith sent Bad Guy crashing into the wall, keeping him alive for no reason other than to gloat at his misfortune. Bad Guy coughed a mouthful of blood. His bones were crushed, his internal organs bleeding, his dantian almost crippled, but his ego was stronger than ever. "Uncle, please save me. This beastard dared to hit me. So despicable. Why did you refuse to die when I politely asked you to?" Lith wanted to reply to such senseless words, but another nondescript character appeared. He was older than Bad Guy, and his t-shirt recited, "I'm the uncle." The professors were so scared by his appearance that they hid in the previous page of this very same chapter, trying to escape his fury. That's the legendary Bad Guy's uncle. Now Lith is really done for. He refused a toast only to drink a defeat. "Who dares to hurt my nephew? I'm Uncle insert boring wannabe threatening speech here from the Envy family. Cripple your dantian and cut your own arms, and maybe I will let you live as a dog." Such a compelling offer. Lith sneered. "But you are a side character as well." I have no time to waste. Scram and make the final boss appear. Lith sneezed, and the power of that simple move broke down Uncle's body and will, sending him crashing in the wall right beside Bad Guy. "Oh, Patriarch, please avenge us," he said, coughing a mouthful of blood before passing out. "Who dares defy the Envy family?" A heaven-defying bellow shook the whole academy, while Patriarch Final Boss descended from the sky. "Oh God, it's Patriarch Final Boss from the Envy family. We are here by accident. We don't belong in this novel." The professors left the pages of the novel, running for their lives. His nondescript character's t-shirt saying, "I'm the final boss," was all the proof of identity anyone could ever need. I admit you have some talent, young MC. But it's time that this story goes back to its rightfully tracks. It belongs to my Envy family. Lith laughed coldly. Did you even bother reading the title? It's Supreme Magus, not the Envy Chronicles. Enough wasting pages. Do your worst. How dare you correct me when I am so wrong even a blind, deaf, and dumb man would notice. Take this hit if you dare. Final Boss unsheathed the Black Phoenix Evil God Cyber Monday sword, a peerless artifact that the Envy family had passed on through the generations. The sword light was filled with boundless power and knowledge. Sword intent could be clearly seen, piercing time, space, and even the author's patience that was growing short with so many filler words in the same sentence. The audience felt like Mount Tai was falling down from the sky. The pressure of that strike was unbearable, even for the spectators. No one could possibly imagine what Lith was feeling under such killing intent. It was pure and unrestrained boredom. Lith didn't move from his spot. Simply ripping open his robe, he revealed what was hidden inside. The world-class beauties, imagining him to be stark naked underneath, experienced non-stop nosebleed, to the point that the most delicate ones fainted on the spot. The simple idea of his dancing chiseled pecs, big enough to play chess over them, and a 6AB pack hard enough to act as a washboard was too much for a young maiden's mind to take. But Lith wasn't naked, on the contrary. Under his robe lied the strongest weapon of all creation. "Oh my God," said a professor that had tripped in the webpage address, and hence was still there. "Shiny as silver, light as silk, but durable without equals. No, it cannot be." Even Final Boss, despite still performing his strike, was able to catch a glimpse of the true nature of his opponent. "That's right." Lith laughed a handsome, overbearing, manly, peerless, genius laughter. "It's the legendary platinum armor, better known as plot armor." "Hi there, I'm the author," the armor said. "Now scram, I'm not going to change the title of my work for a nondescript cookie-cut character like you." "New!" When the sword and the plot armor collided, Final Boss disappeared from existence, and so did Bad Guy and Uncle. And so Lith lived happily ever after, never knowing exactly how many members his harem reached, despite having an intimate knowledge of every and each one of them. White Griffin Academy staff, Headmaster Linjos, the young headmaster of the White Griffin Academy, trying to reform the institution on behalf of the Queen. Professor Gian Trask holds the Theory of Combat Magic class, teaching the students the importance of first chore magic and how to use it to survive close encounters when fake magic is not available. Professor Valessa Nalir holds the Principles of Advanced Magic class, teaching the students a method exclusive to the 6 big academies on how to cast Tier 4 spells and above. Professor Vaster, professor in charge of the Healer Specialization class. Professor Duke Marth, head of the White Griffin Light Department. A brilliant mage and the only one capable to handling Manohar. Didamarth's cameo, Professor Krishna Manohar, nicknamed the God of Healing, is a genius mage with a wild and temperamental attitude. Edicted's cameo. Professor Leica Wannemeyer, professor in charge of the Forge Master Specialization class. Professor Rugen Thorman, professor in charge of the Mage Knight Specialization class. White Griffin Academy relevant students. Uriel Dyrus, son of Archmage Dyrus, undertaking 2 specializations, Healer and Warden. Freya Solivar, daughter of Duchess Solivar, undertaking 2 specializations, Healer and Mage Knight. Quilla from Syria, an orphan from a backwater village, aiming to become a healer like Lith. Before coming to the academy, she suffered from a bad case of malnutrition. Vizin de Bry, part of Lith's group during the mock exam. He is studying to become a warden. Milna Kratic, part of Lith's group during the mock exam. She is studying to become a war mage. Follow new stories at NoVLB.com. Floria Ernest, part of Lith's group during the mock exam. She is studying to become a Mage Knight. Belia Ulfar, part of Lith's group during the mock exam. She is studying to become a battle mage. Forest creatures. Scarlet, boss of the forest, is a giant powerful scorpicore that helps supervising the exams that take place in the wilderness. Scarlet's cameo. Mrook, a Rai loser named Cameo, a wolf-type magical beast. Scarlet's second in command and leader of an elite squad. Centaur, a Kron, a hawk. His father was a bipolar abusive man, capable of disappearing in his bedroom for days during the depressive phase. He would wake up only to eat, use the bathroom, and the occasional "let's make your life miserable" fit of rage. During his euphoric phase, he would work like a madman, but not having any talent either as a businessman nor a social climber. He was unable to both being successful and establishing the right connections. Explore up-to-date stories at Novel Bin. Calm, in his natural state, whenever he decided to actually take his medications. He was just a coach potato that would stand up and go to work just to avoid the blame and spite from neighbors and peers. Whatever was his mental condition, he always was a perfect example of an abusive father. His sons were always a disgrace in his eyes. They never studied hard enough, never were disciplined enough, nor did show enough respect. And he was always there to remember them how wrong they were. He would yell at them for the slightest mistake, constantly reminding them that they were just parasites that leached off his hard work. And when words weren't enough, or when they did fail to meet his expectation with school grades or chores, there was no teacher like his leather belt. Hence, Derek and Carl had to quickly learn how to fend off for themselves, since their absent-minded mother practically forgot about them right after giving birth, dedicating her life in pursuit of peace and quiet, staying as far as possible from her spouse tantrums. Derek was 2 years older and desperately tried to take care of his little brother, but to no avail. They grew up watching and reading stories about heroes protecting the weak and upholding justice. But no hero ever appeared to save them. Every week they would be forced to go to church to worship a nondescript benevolent God and his son, the savior of all mankind. But no matter how much they prayed or how good they were, no miracle occurred. So they simply stopped believing in heroes, and instead of wasting time with prayers, they crammed. School was their only oasis, but that lasted only until the 6th grade. Once in middle school, it didn't even take a month before the bullying started. Their cheap clothes and gloomy disposition made them the easiest targets. They were so used being tossed around and insulted that they didn't even bother trying to fight back. For a long time, Derek had considered it the worst moment in his useless life. After a month, he knew he could not take any more of that, so he tried to make things better. He reported his father's abuses to the social services with an anonymous email, but being overworked and understaffed, the social work assistant made a brief visit and never came back. Then, he tried to end the bullying by reporting their aggressors to a teacher, which in turn washed her hands by reporting it to the principal. The principal did not want to meddle with what he deemed as childish pranks, so he called Derek's parents to inform them of the problem, hoping they would let it slide. And at least his wish came true. Derek, instead, took an extra beating for not being man enough to face his own problems. Are you really that stupid to never learn anything from me? Never delegate. If you want something done right, do it yourself. Derek had never felt so helpless and desperate, so that night he bawled his eyes out until he fell asleep. That had been the last straw. The next day he felt different, clear-headed like never before. It was not the time for despair anymore. He needed a plan. It would take him years to realize that something inside him had died. He was no longer able to trust, hope, or develop any sense of kinship. He was surrounded by enemies, and to survive, Derek needed to be able to fight back. So Derek asked his father to let him join a dojo and learn martial arts. And to his surprise, he did not have to beg or even ask twice. His old man was glad that his wimpy and scrawny, poor excuse of a child was finally interested in becoming a man. His only condition was that Derek was not allowed to quit for at least 1 year, otherwise he would have to pay for it. Not only Derek started practicing Aikido almost daily, he would also wake up 2 hours earlier every single day to build muscles doing push-ups, squats, sit-ups, and running until he was out of breath. In a few months, he was finally able to do every day 100 push-ups, sit-ups, and squats, and run for at least 10 kilometers before going to school. Aikido soon revealed to be a perfect choice for his situation. At low level was mainly focused on self-defense, but there plenty of space for attacking and fighting dirty. By practicing martial arts, he finally discovered something he was good at. He was not particularly nimble, nor a fast learner. His hand-to-eye coordination was also average at best. His talent lied in the ability to spot the best time to hit a sensible spot during a block or a defensive maneuver. Even when the sensei was teaching sword or tanto arts, Derek was always able to grasp the killing moves at his first try, sometimes even before the sensei completed the practical demonstration. It was an exciting yet disappointing discovery since his only talent had no practical use. Even if Aikido was a sport with tournaments instead of a discipline, hits to groin, eyes, and trachea were universally forbidden. For months, Derek kept training hard while keeping a low profile at school, planning his next move. At the end of the first semester, Derek stopped hiding from the bullies and started replying in kind to every single insult they threw at him, using the best quick-witted roast lines he had found online. Derek paid attention to never go to the bathroom or to remain alone for too long, always keeping an adult witness in line of sight. It did not even take a full day before his enemies were fuming and outraged. Only when the veins almost popped out their necks, he threw his bait. "I have enough of your shoals. Meet me in an hour behind the grocery shop between Lincoln and the 3rd. Or are you too scared? Since you seek death, I will happily grant your wish, you forgot. It will only be you and the 3 of us, all right?" Derek nodded without believing him in the least. And he was right. When they entered the back alley, they had brought along 2 more people. Derek was waiting for them, leaned against the wall at the end of the blind alley. "There you are. I was starting to think you would stand me up." They started laughing. "Sorry we were late. Hope you do not mind we taking some friends for the party." Derek shrugged, while grinning from ear to ear. "No problem. No matter how much, worthless trash is always trash. I chose this alley because it's fully equipped with enough dumpsters to accommodate all of your friends." The last line hit a nerve, so they charged at him blindly. "Gang up on him, guys. Do not let him escape. Let's how him, who is the trash." And so, they fell into his trap. Derek had come here preparing the terrain and choosing the best spot to fight. A blind alley to not make them escape. The end of the alley so they would not notice the tripwire due to the dim light. The first 2 fell down hard on the concrete, and those behind them were so worried about not trampling on their friends that never saw the steel pipe coming. They did come in numbers. Derek had come fully armed. Using the pipe as a sword, he quickly hit them respectively on the head, the side of the knee, in the groin. Only then he started hitting the 2 that were trying to get back on their feet. While they were moaning and sobbing on the ground, he used a small knife to cut the tripwire. Then he started beating them again and again with the metal pipe, giving a special attention to the nether regions. Deeply inside, he knew what he was doing was wrong, but he could not care less. If the world was built to be unfair, the only possible course of action was to make it unfair at his advantage. So, he took out the taser that he borrowed from his father and tased them until unconscious. Then he stripped them completely and took multiple photos of each one of them, and even filmed them after arranging them so that they would seem to be spooning to each other. Then he splashed them with a bucket of cold water and sealed the deal. "Sorry to ruin your Brokeback Mountain moment, girls, but I need your attention for a minute." When the bullies woke up, they were still in so much pain they could barely notice that they were naked and embracing each other. Retorting to Derek while he had still a firm grip on the steel pipe was out of question, so they kept quiet and listened. "I have made quite a scrapbook of you, even a short movie, uploaded it on my computer and even into the cloud. And it would be terrible if someone I do not know, like me for example, would upload them on all the biggest image hosting sites. You know how they say, internet never forgets." The bullies started crying and begging. "Imagine how terrible would it be? Whenever someone would Google your names, be it your grandma, your girlfriends, or even the colleges you were willing to apply to, the first thing to appear would be those photos." "Dude, no. Please, I do not even know you. I was just making a favor to a friend. It was only a joke. Please forgive me." The choir of begging gave him the goosebumps. Derek wanted to puke at their hypocrisy. "I do not care for your pathetic excuses. From this day onward, you will leave me alone. And you better pray that nothing happens to me, because the cloud is set so that if I do not enter the password every day, it will upload them everywhere." Without waiting for their reply, he turned back and walked away. "Almost forgetting I randomly threw your clothes in the dumpsters. Can't remember which is which." If you don't want to go home in your birthday suit, you better start digging. So long, suckers. Derek returned home euphoric, almost singing. He had never felt so proud of himself and had the completely undeserved confidence that he would never think about those B-stars ever again. The bullying ended, but his social life never stopped being miserable. How could he possibly make any friend with such a shameful private life? He had to constantly hide the bruises with long sleeves and had run out of plausible excuses for his streak of black eyes months before. His classmates and professors simply pretended to not know, and he just pretended to believe being that good of a liar. It was painful, but manageable. He still had his little brother to share that pain with. Carl was all he had, his family, friend, and confidant. He was Derek's whole world. But when that age came, he started having crushes toward girls in his school, and those feelings weren't as easily suppressed. Once again, he felt utterly helpless. He could not tell anyone about his problems, could not allow people to get close to him. Otherwise, he would have to think of an explanation for not being allowed to bring any friend home, let alone a girl he liked. Derek was tormented by cruel thoughts, often demanding the heavens why what others took for granted was but an impossible dream for him. Fueled by the hormonal storms, Derek's rage started growing relentlessly. He started having trouble sleeping at night, thinking about all those lovey-dovey couples out there. Derek knew he was different from them. His crippling flaw wasn't being shy or having a bad case of acne. His problem couldn't be cured by any doctor because it had a name and surname. Ezio Esposito, his trash bag of a father. Derek started conceiving plan after plan to get rid of him, even if that meant killing him. At night, he would devise elaborate and meticulous plans that often involved prolonged torture, making Ezio suffer like Derek did for all those years. But when morning came, he would always realize it was a dumb plan, more wishful thinking than anything else. Derek lacked the means and the ruthlessness necessary for getting rid of Ezio. No matter how much he hated him, Ezio was still his father and he was just an angry teenager. Kill Ezio? Sure. And what about then? Live a whole life ridden with guilt? Running away from home to avoid being the arrested? And with what money? Killing Ezio would have meant abandoning Carl forever and destroying any possible chance of being happy in the future. So, every morning Derek would swallow his plan along with the porridge and move on. His only real prospect was to cram as a madman, get a scholarship, and get out of that hell as fast as possible. Time flew, and in the blink of an eye was the last summer before Derek's first year of high school. Despite the hot climate, his heart was cold as ice. Derek had already hit his growth spurt. That combined with his martial arts and muscle training had given him a mean look. Ezio was aware of that, and being a coward, had started to avoid beating Derek as much as possible, making Carl the new favorite target. Derek had already tried standing up for his brother, but the only result had been Ezio buying a nightstick from the local army surplus and getting beaten with it instead that with Ezio's bare hands. He saved Carl from that by begging and crying, and only because the ruckus had alarmed their neighbors. So, whenever Ezio threw one of his tantrums, Derek could only watch his brother getting beaten again and again. Then, one morning, Ezio received his first big commission in years. So, he wore his best suit despite the heat, and had Derek preparing him the briefcase and the laptop. Ezio was in a real hurry. He could not afford his competitors to snatch this whale. It could have been his career-making commission. Derek rushed to the door, where Ezio was already waiting, and helped him adjust the laptop satchel. Ezio ran to the elevator, pushing the button like a madman, but the light remained red. Cursing his damn condo, the building manager and his rotten luck Ezio made a rush to the stairs. And that's when Derek noticed it. Turning his head to follow his father, Derek noticed that the light made odd reflections on the hallway's floor. Discover new stories on NoVLBNCom. Ezio had just passed in front of him when he realized that the janitor had just washed the stairs, but forgot to put the wet floor sign. It happened all in an instant. Ezio made a long, heavy stride, all his weight down and forward, and then his foot slipped. Derek could have warned him, could have even extended an arm and prevented the fall. But instead, he chose to remain still. Ezio tumbled down the stairs, bounced on the next alley, and tumbled again, crashing downstairs. His body was a broken mess, all his limbs bent in unnatural angles. As any teenager, Derek had his smartphone at hand, so he started to make several photos to prove that the floor was wet and there was no warning sign. His mind was already planning on hiring the best shark lawyer he could and sue the building managing firm responsible for his condo. Only then, he carefully walked down the stairs to confirm Ezio's death. He was there, incapable of making a moan or asking for help, but his eyes were fixated on Derek, begging for help. Derek grinned to him and said, "Do you really think I am so stupid to never learn anything from you? As you more than once taught me, never delegate. If you want something done right, do it yourself. Your smartphone is in your pocket, take it out and call." "I'm just a failure of a son. I do not want to mess this up for you, Daddy." Ezio's eyes were full of shock and hate, but that lasted only a moment. His head went limp, his gaze blank. A laughter fought to came out, but Derek suppressed it. Instead, he started shouting for help, putting on his best terrorized son impression. As always, Derek's mother was too obsessed with her problems, her grief, her feelings to bother looking for the lawyer, leaving everything in Derek's hand, since Ezio was no more. 3 birds with 1 stone. After a careful research, he contacted and hired the best shark lawyer they could afford so that Derek would be his client instead of his mother. He told him everything about his father's incident, the abuse, and the need to make so that the money would be split between the 3 of them, mother and sons. Both Derek and Carl were very firm on that point. They wanted the lawyer to start the process to get emancipation. With the money from the compensation and the inheritance, they had enough to be self-sufficient until Derek could provide for them both. What followed was the happiest period in their life. First, they obtained the inheritance, and shortly after they got emancipated and moved away from their mother's place. Not even a month later, they received a very generous settling offer from the building manager. They used it to settle up and make proper plans for the future. During the following years, bullies were not a problem. Derek and Carl were now both martial artists and had each other's back. Finally, they could experience having friends and girlfriends, their domestic nightmare finally over. They suffered many disappointments though, since too many of those so-called friends turned out to be people that wanted to use their parent-free house as a party house. Also, they had a hard time figuring what being a normal teen was supposed to be. While their peers seemed only interested in having fun and skipping classes, they were focused on studying and saving as much as possible. Derek and Carl would spend holidays and vacations doing part-time jobs to slow down the thinning of their bank account. They were not poor, but not rich either. They knew they had to save as much as possible, in case rainy days would once more fall upon them. But all in all, they had a good life. Derek got a scholarship and obtained a bachelor degree in chemistry, soon followed by a master in biochemistry. Carl was doing well too, already got his engineering degree, ready to study for his master, and already had a fiancée. Despite being really happy for his little brother, that was really a painful thorn in Derek's side. He had always been the more socially inept between the two, and never managed to get into a stable relationship, not even in college. Derek had no problem talking to girls. The problem always lied in him being picky and ended in his inability to trust. He had had many crushes, but never fell in love. At the beginning, he put the blame on his bad luck, always finding shallow or idiotic girls. After finding more than one good girl, he put the blame on his dark past. But when confronted with Carl's happy relationship, he could only blame himself. While Carl had suffered almost the same things, he got out much stronger and purer than Derek. Derek was just too scared of being hurt again to let any relationship grow above a certain level, and that was an enemy that he could not just beat up. Derek accepted the first decent paid job he got, working in the night shift of a big chemical company in the Q&A department. Carl had shared with him, as a graduation present, that he was willing to propose to his fiancée as soon as he got his master. Hence, Derek needed money because he had only 2 years to save enough to give his little brother a decent wedding. Derek did not like his current job, but it was a way to start his working career and filling his curriculum. Also, it was well paid, and he resolved to use the company insurance to seek for psychological counseling. He knew he had problems and wanted to work them out. Derek consulted several doctors before finding someone he was able to work with, and after several months he felt he was finally starting to make some progress. But alas, such happiness was not bound to last. It was a Friday evening, and Derek was getting prepared for work. He was still stuck doing conda because the pay was too good, and no matter how many times Carl said he wanted a small ceremony, Derek was sure that whatever they planned to spend, it would at least double in the end. It was a goddamn wedding, Hence, things were supposed to blow off proportions at some point. That's just how they work. Derek was adjusting his shirt when the smartphone rang on the notes of Night on Bald Mountain, the preset ringtone for unknown numbers. Derek Esposito, who is it? Mr. Esposito, this is the St. Joseph Hospital. The female voice sounded worried. This, together with the word hospital, sent him a shiver down his spine. Is Carl Esposito your brother? Derek could almost hear her biting her nails. Yes, what happened? He was involved in a car accident and is in serious conditions. You should come here as soon as possible. The doctors need you since you are his healthcare proxy and the patient in unconscious. A car accident? Derek yelled, while rushing out of the door and looking for a cab. We don't have any Fushin car. What the hell happened? I'm sorry, I am not at liberty to say. The doctors will explain it. Derek hung up on her. He had no time for useless babbling, only for a goddamn cab. Every second in the traffic was torture, and when he finally arrived, it was too late. The surgeon and a police officer explained to him that Carl had been run over by a drunk driver. The culprit had run off and the police was still looking for him. A bystander had immediately called, but because of the traffic jam caused by the accident, it took hours for the ambulance to arrive. So, when Carl arrived at the hospital, he was already in critical conditions. He had multiple fractures, ruptured spleen and internal bleeding, requiring immediate surgery. Derek had been called while Carl was just entering the Oregon. They had done their best to save him, but Carl had lost too much blood, so there was nothing they could do. They offered Derek their condolences, but all he could hear was white noise. Let me see my brother, he begged. The body was covered by a sheet, only the head visible. Derek could still see traces of blood on the face of his little brother. Derek left his number to the police officer to be kept updated about the investigations, and then returned home. The culprit was quickly apprehended thanks to the traffic cameras. It turned out to be a kid, barely 17 years old, that had stolen his old man's car and then got drunk and high with his friends. Derek lived the months before the trial in anguish. The damn DA had decided to prosecute him as a minor, and the even more damn judge had granted him house arrests. All while his little brother, his Carl, was dead because of him. How could they do such a thing? Derek would yell and argue with anyone willing to listen to him. Why all this talking about the rights and the future of that little shit? What about my brother's rights? What about his future? Carl has none because of him. What kind of justice is that? Derek visited multiple times the DA office, expressing his outrage and demanding them to ask for the maximum sentence. They were always kind and accommodating, and promised him that they would not forget about Carl. When the day of the trial finally came, Derek's world died one more time. The DA and the defense attorney had come to a settlement. Since Chris Wainwright, this was the name of the murderer, was still a minor, and that was also his first offense, he had accepted to go in rehab and do 600 hours of community service. If Chris would complete his rehab program and did not commit crimes in the next 3 years, then he would be a free citizen with no criminal record. Derek was too dumbfounded to even be angry. When the session was over, he just walked to the DA and asked a single question with muffled voice. Why? And then with their most kind and accommodating tone, the DA assistants explained to Derek that Chris was just a kid from a good family that had made a dumb mistake. He had a brilliant future ahead. Chris had already been admitted at the Caltech, and this was his first offense. Also, his parents had hired a great lawyer, and the judge would likely be unwilling to destroy Chris's life. Despite their expectations, Derek did not make a scene. Derek's fire was extinguished. He had no more tears to shed. In the following days, Derek lived by going through the motions. He kept following his routine like nothing had happened, his brain still refusing everything that happened in the last half year. The only thing that made him feel alive was that constant headache that had started shortly after Carl's death. According to his doctor, it was a stress-related symptom, so with all that had happened, Derek had just been swallowing aspirins and paracetamol like they were candies. But the pain never did go away. Instead, it was getting worse. Derek finally found the strength to get a serious checkup, and once again, bad news were waiting for him. According to the full body scan and the follow-up biopsy, he had stage 2 pulmonary cancer. But I never smoked in my whole life, Derek exclaimed, more amused than scared. Indeed, it's odd. Dr. Monroe, his oncologist, was quite puzzled. She was a good-looking Hispanic woman, maybe 5 years older than Derek. In another moment, he would have probably asked her out. You told me you work for a chemical company, right? Derek nodded. Such an aggressive cancer is too uncommon to be a coincidence. My personal opinion is that their ventilation system failed. You and God knows how many more people have been breathing poison from quite some time, but we wear masks the whole time we work with the chemicals, and speaking for myself, I followed the safety protocols to the letter. My colleagues always mock me for it. Derek was still in disbelief. Then maybe the masks are cheap pieces of junk. Or maybe the lab or the storage, if not both, have leaks. These corporate scumbags only seek profits. It would not surprise me in the least if they cut from the safety budget to put more dividends in their pockets. Dr. Monroe was too outraged. Even in his catatonic state, Derek could tell there was more to it. Doctor, what are you hiding from me? He asked, looking her straight in the eyes for the first time. She nibbled on her lower lip for a while before answering. Between you and me, you are not the first case from your company. I have already reported it to the Department of Health and to the federals. If I were in your shoes, I would get a good lawyer and sue the soul out of them. You'll need a lot of money for the treatments. I agree on the lawyer, but I refuse any treatment. I'll just take palliative care. Dr. Monroe jumped from her chair. Do you realize that without the proper treatments you have 6 months, a year at best to live? Also, as I have already said, your cancer is really aggressive. We need to start as soon as possible if we want a chance to beat it. The situation was dramatic, but Derek found all those wee words hilarious, so he could not refrain from chuckling. We barely know each other, doctor. So, we have nothing to do if not going separate ways, Derek said to her with an icy tone. What do I have to live for? I have no family, no loved ones. My little brother's ashes are all that is left to keep me company. I could die tomorrow and I would not give a st. They parted on bad terms, but she still gave him her number in case he changed his mind or simply needed to talk. Derek called his old shark lawyer and explained everything. Years had passed, but they would still send each other Christmas cards. Derek had kept tabs on him, just in case. He had now more gray hair than before, but was still a first-class shark. Derek stopped going to work and started spending his money without much care. He would go to all the fancy restaurants he had always wanted to try, bought the suits he always dreamed about, and only ate his favorite foods for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Derek would spend most of his days playing games on his brand new gaming PC and revisiting all the spots that held a significance for him and Carl. Then, 24 days after the diagnosis, he had an epiphany. It was a night like all the others since he had quit his job. Derek would wear one of his new suits and wander off the city to see what would kill him first, the cancer or a random crazy head. Once reached exhaustion or simply boredom, he would then take a cab and get back home. Derek was walking with quick strides, high on his medications when he saw him. Chris Wainwright. He was holding a bottle of liquor, ill-hidden inside a paper bag, from which he would drink in big gulps. Chris was talking and laughing loudly with a teen girl that was showing a lot of skin. She was holding a joint, taking big puffs, until they traded and got into a car. It was a custom-painted muscle car. Not the same Camaro that Chris had used to kill Carl. It was even bigger and more expensive. In that moment, Derek wanted to puke blood. How could he possibly have forgotten about that little bastard? Had his cancer really screwed up his brain so bad to be willing to let such a loose end slip? The tires screeched and the car started suddenly, almost running over a woman that was crossing the road. The skimpily dressed girl rolled down the window, yelling insults at the woman that was still frozen in fear. Derek could almost hear that couple of idiots laughing. Gritting his teeth, he called a cab and started to plan his final act. First, he started to stalk Chris on all the social networks, learning all his routines and habits. Then Derek began to follow him and planted a GPS tracker under the Camaro to always know his exact location. Simply skimming through Chris's chirper, he found at least 50 violations of the parole deal. While following him, Derek took many photos of Chris abusing alcohol and drugs, but Derek had no intention to submit the evidence to the police. What could he possibly gain from that? Chris would just get another slap on the wrist and then start being more careful. Derek had not the luxury of time, nor the willingness of doing what the so-called justice system was supposed to. Less than a week later, by checking Chris's Bookface page, Derek learnt of a rave he would participate to. Derek double-checked his equipment and jumped into his new car. a black 1967 Chevrolet Impala. The best car to hunt monsters with. The rave was secret, hence it would take place in some run-down abandoned location. Derek followed Chris closely, and as soon they were away from traffic cams, he ran into the Camaro from the side, forcing Chris to halt. As soon as Chris stepped down of the car, Derek took him down with a stun gun and then quickly proceeded to check if the Camaro had more passengers. It seemed to be his lucky night. Chris was driving alone. Derek searched him and crushed every electronic device he could find. Bitfit, smartphone, even Chris's keychain. Derek tied him hands and feet and ball-gagged him. Then he destroyed his own smartphone and the GPS tracker, tossing everything outside the road. Then he moved Chris in the trunk of the Impala, headed toward a party only for the two of them. Derek drove to an abandoned warehouse in the old industrial area. He had already got rid of the lock and chain that kept the big metallic doors closed, replacing them with his own. Inside the warehouse, there were only 2 chairs, both bolted to the ground, a bucket and several water tanks. Derek opened the trunk, discovering that Chris had regained his senses, so he tased him again. Then he took Chris to a chair and started tightly binding his arms and legs to it. Then Derek splashed him with a bucket of water, forcing him to regain focus. "Hello, Chris. My name is Derek Esposito, and you killed my brother. We need to talk." Chris tried getting out of the restraints, and while commending his efforts, Derek violently hit him in the groin with the nightstick. The pain paralyzed him. "Where was I? Oh, yes. The last time we saw each other was during your farce trial. Do you remember me?" Chris's panting intensified. "Good. Let's get straight to business." Derek took 2 digital timers out of the car, setting the first to 30 minutes and the second to 2 hours, 44 minutes, and 16 seconds. Then, he pulled out a gun and double-tapped Chris's liver. His scream was muffled by the gag ball, but the shots echoed loudly in the empty warehouse. Derek started both timers simultaneously and came in close, checking the blood. It was dense and black, a clear indicator of a crushed liver. "Now, before the real pain settles in, I need you to take a good look to the timers. They are really important." Chris was crying and screaming, so Derek had to splash him again and pull him by hair to get his attention. The first timer marks how much time you have left. After it rings, even if someone should miraculously break through that door and rescue you, you would be dead anyway. You have only so much time until your system gets flooded by toxins unfiltered by the liver, to the point that no transplant can save you. The second timer is a surprise. We'll get to it in time. For now, your only task is to stay awake and savor every moment of pain, like Carl did. The time flew. Chris kept screaming through the gag ball, and soon the fist timer rang. Chris started sobbing even stronger, sometimes stopping only because overwhelmed by the constantly rising pain. Derek would speak to him no longer. He would just pace back and forth, occasionally checking the second timer. Every time Chris fainted, Derek would splash him and force him to stay awake before refilling the bucket. When the second timer rang, Derek finally spoke again. "I have bad news and I have good news. The bad news is that I lied before. I thoroughly researched liver injuries, and with such crushed liver you had no hope to begin with. Even if I had shot you in front of the best hospital in the USA, unless they had a compatible liver at hand, you would have died. I wanted to give you false hope, as happened to my brother, while waiting for help. The good news is that you just suffered as long as Carl did. I may be many things, unrelenting, vengeful, a liar, a murderer, but I am also fair. So your suffering ends now." Derek pointed the gun to Chris's head and double-tapped him. Then he pointed it to his own head. "Little brother, I'm coming. Wait for me," and pulled the trigger one last time. While Derek's body was still falling, his consciousness was bathed in light and he felt pulled toward the sky. After months of grieving, a whole lifetime of misery and pain, Derek felt that all his traumas and hatred were fading away. Derek had never experienced such bliss. In this new form, he felt no negative emotion. He was in peace with his past, unafraid of his future. Derek was enjoying a present that he felt could lead to endless possibilities, and there was no right and wrong, success or failure. He would simply be, no strings attached. That intoxicating feeling lasted until he suddenly woke up, alive and breathing. All his negative emotions returned, plunging him back into despair. Derek cursed inwardly while trying to focus his eyes. Maybe it was because of the shot to the head, but his vision was blurry. So much for the perfect plan. Some idiot must have rescued me, and somehow I survived the journey to the hospital. I'm still alive. I still have cancer. I am still alone. But when his eyes finally cleared up, they strongly disagreed with his reasoning. Derek was in some kind of huge metal corridor surrounded by dead bodies. Alien dead bodies, to be precise. They were all wearing some kind of full body armor that resembled some kind of sci-fi spacesuit. Where the fuck am I? What the hell does this mean? He screamed while trying to get up, only to fall back on the floor. He fell hand first, and only then he noticed that he was wearing a spacesuit too, and that his hands, all four of them, had 3 fingers each. What the actual f? After much screaming and freaking out, Derek finally regained his composure and started to analyze his current predicament. The first thing that caught his eye was a huge hole in the spacesuit at the chest level. The contours of the hole had burn marks all over it, and there was a lot of purple jelly on both his suit and the dead bodies. That meant the purple jelly was coagulated alien blood. Derek turned his head to see the spot where he had woken up, noticing a lot of blood and even something that he found safe to assume were some kind of splattered viscera. This makes no sense, he thought. All the evidence points to the fact that this body was dead as Julius Caesar until I somehow happened to inhabit it. And for whatever reason, it's also fully healed. Oh man, this means all religions are dead wrong. Luckily, I never believed in any mumbo-jumbo, otherwise I would be really disappointed right now. Derek then proceeded examining his new body. It had 4 arms, only 2 legs, but all the limbs were long and skinny. The legs were reverse-jointed, like those of a cat. Both hands and feet had only 3 fingers each. Derek was really curious about his facial features, but there was no reflective surface in sight. So he tried feeling his face with the fingers, but the suit turned out to come with a helmet, which did not impede his senses though. The only thing he could establish was the shape of the helmet, and based on it, Derek's new head should have been something similar to a shark's dorsal fin. Then he tried to speak. Test, Derek Esposito, 1, 2, 3. He could somehow do it, but it was still English. That meant that he did not inherit neither the muscle memory nor the intellect from the body's previous owner. Derek tried getting up, but the center of gravity was too different from his old body, so he had to give up and proceed crawling like a baby. So, he started examining the corpses to make heads or tails of what was happening around him. Judging from the suits, there were 2 factions at war. One had a red-colored spacesuit, and the other, which Derek was donning, was gray. He had no idea which side was winning, but it would not make any difference to him anyway. Unless the suit was equipped with a universal translator, he was incapable of communicating. Enemies would kill him on sight. Allies would probably ditch him like garbage. Who would ever want a rambling idiot, incapable even of walking during a life-or-death situation? I'm not even here from a day, and I am already as good as dead. Refusing to give up, Derek managed to get up by leaning on the walls and started exploring. The corridor had many doors, yet his choices were painfully limited, since he could only go through the open ones. Derek had no idea how to open the doors, nor how to operate the control panels that he found along the way. He tried pushing buttons at random, but nothing happened. And he was starting to get hungry. Will I die like this? Starving in a goddamn spaceship, alien planet, or whatever the fuck is this? I don't know what this useless pile of flesh eats. Even if I stumble on a mountain of food, I have no way to know what is what. And even if I did, I do not know how the heck to remove this helmet. After walking for several hours, hunger and frustration drove him to hysteria. Derek screamed and kicked whatever was within reach, until exhaustion made him fall asleep. When he woke up, his mind was clear again. This is a nightmare. I am all out of options, to the point that even if I wanted to kill myself, I would not know how. He banged the back of his head against the wall to keep frustration at bay. I never thought about this, but being reborn in a sci-fi environment is truly the worst-case scenario. Alien body, alien customs, complete lack of the new species' common sense. And to make things worse, everything here is so high-tech that I cannot even operate a door. Heck, every goddamn button could be tagged and it would still be useless to me since I don't know their language. His hunger was rising, and he was feeling weaker by the hour. Having no time to lose, he started wandering again, this time banging and screaming at every door he met, trying to draw some attention. Derek was on the verge of fainting again due to hunger and exhaustion when finally a door opened up. The shock was great enough for him to lose his grip and fall to the ground. On the other side, there were gray-suited aliens in a wedge formation. Every one of them was holding some kind of long metal staff as it was a rifle. Derek didn't even attempt to get up. He just waved a right hand, hoping it was a peace sign. "Captain, that's XR. His life signal getting back online wasn't a glitch in the system. He is still alive." From this point onward means words that Derek does not understand. The formation opened, and a taller and bulkier alien closed in. The soldiers never lowered their weapons nor lost focus, waiting for the attack order. "What are you doing on the floor, soldier?" "And how in Thrax's name did you survive that ambush?" the captain asked with a coarse voice. "Dude, I have no idea what you just said." What is he rambling? "Medic, any reading on that blaster wound?" A purple-dressed alien walked forward while scanning Derek's body. "None, sir. It's not any dialect in the Empire." And the scanner confirms that the hole in his armor is definitely from a Corellan blaster. I have no idea how he survived it unscathed. It's a miracle. "It's a liability." The captain's tone was grim. He took a staff from a soldier's hands and by pushing a button it became a glaive whose blade was made of pure energy. "Well, seems that I'm going to die from a lightsaber. It's cool. One hit and I'll be turned into dandruff. Lucky me, another painless death incoming." When the captain plunged the glaive into his chest, it did not make any burning sound. It pierced him from side to side, bleeding him to death. The blade was not a laser-based weapon, but a hard light construct, making it no different from an ordinary glaive. "Listen up, soldiers. Izark was a good soldier and we will remember and mourn him as such. When and if we get out of this alive. But that thing, whatever that is a risk we cannot allow to take. Not with Prince Rekhart in our care and those Corellan rebel scum still at large. Better some collateral damage than a spy among our ranks. Now shut that door and check the perimeter again." This time, death was far from painless for Derek. He felt like his chest was on fire, but what really hurt wasn't the wound as much the lungs. Derek was struggling to breathe. Every breath was shallower and more difficult than the last. Blood started gurgling from his mouth, and he felt like slowly drowning. His throat kept contacting, trying to draw in air, but to no avail. It took Derek less than a minute to die, but for him it seemed to last forever. Once again, he found himself basked by blinding light and pulled towards it. Just like the last time, he felt all his worries and rage fading, but instead of enjoying the feeling, he was simply annoyed. Derek had never believed in any god, hence he never believed in heaven or hell. Humankind has always been a terrible race, he thought. It's impossible to define someone as truly bad. Most of the times, the bad guys are simply people who never got a chance to be anything but criminals. Then there are people, like me, whom life had pushed and pushed until they broke, not to mention psycho and sociopaths. How could someone that is born bad be sent to hell simply because his head is malfunctioning? Hence, I have always believed that either there was an afterlife for everyone or no afterlife at all. Death is supposed to be final spirit level, good or bad, rich or poor, the destination has to be the same. Instead, I got this cheap excuse of reincarnation screwing with me. What purpose being reborn could possibly have if I retain all of my memories? Whatever body or planet I would end up in, I would still carry my baggage. So once outside the light, all my pain, rage, and contempt toward humankind would prevent me to learn whatever lesson I am supposed to learn. Inside that otherworldly space, he had the clarity to see that his psychologist was only half right. He could only change if he wanted to, but because of all his past experiences, he had no will to. It was a perfect example of a catch-22 paradox. Suddenly, he was pulled downwards and away from the light. His vision was a blur, but he could still hear a lot of commotion around him. Giant hands were holding him still while he was puking God knows what, and judging from the breeze on his butt cheeks, he was naked. I don't know what the heck is going on, he thought, but I bet I am in deep shit again. When Derek was finally able to see again, he discovered that the hands were not gigantic. The issue was him being very small. A baby, to be precise. He is alive! I did it. I managed to save your boy's life. A further inspection revealed that said hands belonged to some gibberish rambling old hag. Derek was currently inside a wooden shack, surrounded by people dressed with rags that could be called clothes only if they were part of a 1000 AD-themed Renaissance fair. Man, I hate being always right. He is alive, I did it. I managed to save your boy's life. Please, remember that means words that Derek is not capable of understanding. After the midwife triumphantly said those words, the room exploded in cheers and tears of joy. The people in the room were hugging each other, and the mother in turns. Meanwhile, Derek lied limp in the midwife's arms, looking left and right trying to determine how bad was his current situation. Well, what do we have here? The bedridden woman is clearly this body's mother. She definitely needs a bath. After delivery, the sheets were stained with blood, urine, and feces. The crying, rough-looking man should be the father. I wonder if he is crying for my sake, or just because he was afraid of losing his wife. I bet the second one. Then I have a bigger brother and a sister. This is bad. Suddenly, another woman entered the bedroom, bringing with her a little boy and a girl that raced to the bedridden woman. Oh, damn it. This is even worse than I thought. So far, I have only two possible choices. Option 1, grow into this large family, fighting every day for the few available resources. Malnourishment is most definitely a given. Then, when I am old enough, starting to work with father and brothers, getting married, having children, etc. Option 2, wait until I am tall enough to grab sharp objects, put me out of my misery, and take another spin hoping for a better outcome. I think I'll go with option number 2. Meanwhile, the room had become silent. The midwife had already finished cleaning the newborn, wrapped him up in a clean cloth. During all this time, Derek neither moved or cried. Nana, what's wrong with the baby? Why is he not crying? It never happened before. The mother was worried, and ignoring the pain was trying to get up. Shush, child, and don't you dare to move. I still have to heal you. The midwife tone did not leave space for reply. I delivered dozens of children. A silent one is rare, but nothing special. Do you want to see how strong he is? There you go. She unwrapped him from the cloth, and while holding him gently gave a little spanking to force him to cry. Derek grunted a little while staring at her in dismay. Want to play rough, old hag? He thought. Fine. You just triggered my trap card. Twin flood activate. And out of the blue he relieved both his bowels and bladder. The backdoor attackers splattered all over her feet, while the front door flood struck her on the face and chest. Derek started giggling loudly. Well, this wasn't exactly what I was expecting, but as you can hear for yourself, this little imp is breathing just fine. The midwife handed the baby to another woman to clean him. Derek kept giggling, proud of his work. After washing her face with warm water and a cloth, the old hag moved her left index finger, drawing a circle in the air, striking it through in the middle from right to left. Then she pronounced a single word, Ekidu. A black energy manifested on her fingertip. She proceeded to point it over her wet dress and then over her shoes. The smell of feces and urine suddenly disappeared, and so did their source. With his mouth agape in shock, Derek watched as his poop would dry and crumble, turning into dust. It was akin to watching one of those fast-forwarded videos where in 1 minute you could see a seed becoming a flower. Heisenberg's beard. She is not just an old midwife. She is a real magician, in the flesh. I have never been so happy in my whole 3 lives of being so dead wrong. Derek was ecstatic, and not only because that world had magic, but also because as soon as he heard the word Ikidu, he had felt something clicking inside of him. Like if something deep inside of him had started taking root, and suddenly had become ingrained in the very fabric of his new reality. He started repeating obsessively the magic word in his mind, and trying to engrave in his memory every detail of the circular finger movement. Now that I'm clean, let me stop that bleeding, dear. The healer approached the mother and placed her hands above her nether regions. Is it time for another magic? Show me, please, Derek begged in his mind. Nana first spreaded her fingers wide, then started to move both arms in a circular motion, first up over her head, then opened her arms as much as she could before joining her hands. Palm against backhand at her navel's height. Vinyai Lakat, Derek, all wrapped up, tried to mimic all her movements, step after step, memorizing every single detail he could grasp, no matter how small. A sphere of light enveloped Derek's mother's lower body, and she quickly recovered her complexion. The pale skin reverted to a healthy pink, while all the traces of pain and fatigue disappeared from her face. Once again, something clicked inside him. After the dark magic, he could clearly feel that simply by hearing the power word, a connection had been established between him and light magic. Derek could not stop grinning. If I have enough magical talent, it would mean there is actually a third hidden option. He thought, I can become a magician and live free for the first time in my life. No shackles, no responsibilities. But it's better not get over enthusiast. With my luck, I could just have a poor talent or... His reasoning was abruptly interrupted. The woman that had held him until that moment was handing him to his mother. Nana, are you sure he is all right? He has yet to cry, and giggle or not, he is too quiet. With all that happened, I am really afraid that something is wrong with him. After those words, the noisy room turned gloomy. Afraid that he was somewhat responsible, and quite eager to explore option number 3, Derek did his best baby impression, giggling, smiling, and doing raspberry sounds. Nana felt her professional pride hurt by such allegations, but it wasn't her first time with an anxious mother. She knew Alina since she was still a child and had delivered all her babies. Nana could not deny that this delivery had been one of the most difficult of her career. The labor had lasted hours, and she had been forced to cast healing spells multiple times to stop the bleeding. When she finally could see the baby's head, she knew something was wrong. Alina was fighting with all her strength, but the baby was limp. So, she had rushed and used her hands to pull out the baby as fast as possible, only to discover that he was being strangled by his own umbilical cord. After cutting and removing it, she had tried all her best spells, but to no avail. For a whole terrible minute, Nana had believed the child was lost. But then the healing light had finally activated, forcing the baby to puke, clearing his airway. Then and only then, Nana started affording the luxury of relaxing. Healing magic was no miracle. It could enhance the life force of the patient, making easier to recover from an illness or healing from an injury, but it could not create life. Nana was sensitive, so she understood that Alina didn't need a lesson about magic. Just be reassured about her child's health. Worry not, my child. I can prove it to you that all is well. With a warm smile, she caressed Alina's cheek and took Derek from her arms, removing the cloth like she was revealing a treasure. Nana carefully adjusted Derek in the crook of her left arm. Then she circled her open right hand all around him and said, Venir rad tu. A small wisp of light came out of her palm, dancing around the baby before penetrating his chest. The light spread it from head to toe, making him emit a dim light. See, if there was even a scratch on his body, my injury detecting spell would leave that area bleak. Your little son is fine. The energy flowing through his body was making Derek feel empowered. In his old life, he had felt like that only few times. When he got his degrees, when he finally abandoned his parents' home, when he beat up the bullies. But all those times it had been a fleeting emotion, lasting few seconds at best. Now it was different. It wasn't just adrenaline. Real magic, real power was coursing through every fiber of his being, making him feel invincible. So when the spell started fading off, he could not accept that. No, come back to me, give me my power back, Derek screamed inwardly. He focused on the last strands of energy, willing for them to stay. He could not cast the spell on his own, but he could still feel the lingering power and started feeding it with his own. Derek's light stopped dimming and instead grew stronger and stronger. Nana was dumbfounded. She had never seen anything like that before. That was not how the spell was supposed to work. Derek wanted it to last forever, but a second later he fell asleep due to mana exhaustion, and the light disappeared quickly. Nana wrapped up the baby again and returned him to his mother's embrace. Nana, what was that? Alina asked, full of wonder. The old healer had no idea how to answer. Many possibilities popped up in her head, and all of them would require long explanations that would needlessly make Alina worry, and maybe even forcing Nana to repeat the spell. Had been a long day, and she had no intention on prolonging it even a second more than necessary, so she borrowed a line from her childhood's favorite fairy tale. My child, I think the newborn may be blessed by the light. There is no need to worry, only to rejoice. Derek's first days as a baby were peaceful but far from boring. He had no responsibilities. All he to do was eat, sleep, poop, and the occasional baby noise or finger-grabbing routine. That left him with all the time he needed to think about his future. On Earth, it was no mystery that kids had a greater potential for learning than adults, and since his family seemed human, or at least human-like, he could hope for that to be true also in this dimension. From what he could see, his body was no different from a baby from planet Earth. He could hear his heartbeat, his chest inflating and deflating while breathing. Even the reproductive apparatus was the same. The same could be said for his new family. If it wasn't for the existence of magic, he would have simply thought to have traveled through time. But things clearly weren't that simple. Derek quickly dismissed all the "what race am I now" hypothesis as overthinking. One of the advantages of being a baby was that ignorance was perfectly fine. When the time came, someone would teach him. He determined that he had two priorities. Number one, learn their language. All babies are supposed to learn their native language, and he had only so much time before being considered a retard, so he could not slack off. Number two, he had somehow to figure out magic, or at least its foundations. And that also had a deadline, since his learning potential was at its peak only until his brain stopped growing. After that, he would not be different from anyone else with the same talent and disposition for magic. So he set magic as his first priority. Being considered a slow learner was much better than being weak for life and forced to take another spin at reincarnation. Derek spent his first day in the new world in bed, together with his mother, while his father would sleep and rest in the boys' room. Whenever someone talked to him, he paid close attention, trying to figure out common words or patterns. The rest of the time he was not eating or the cloth diaper being changed, he would try to cast one of the three spells he knew: Aikido, Venera Lakat, and Venera Rod-2. Every attempt was a failure. He could not feel even an iota of power inside himself. Comparing what he saw from what he knew from Earth's dungeons and looting, those spells had clearly a verbal and somatic component. But that couldn't be all, or at least he hoped so. Otherwise, until he was able to talk, all his efforts would have been wasted. Failure after failure, his anxiety grew stronger. Fear of the unknown and of tomorrow started to build up. Also, getting used to poop and wet himself wasn't a pleasant feeling either. Thankfully, his mother showered him up with nothing but love and affection, making his day not a total loss. Despite his bias about mothers due to his previous life, Elena managed to make him feel loved and protected. That wasn't half bad at all. The final outcome of his first day was zero progress in magic, no progress with language. But his mother seemed to be a good parent, and he finally learned his new name, Lith. The second day turned his world upside down. Elena, showing the strength of a wild ox, decided she was sick of resting and got up to help doing the daily chores. Lith had the opportunity to see her full figure. Despite giving birth the previous day, she was a good-looking woman in her early 20s. She was definitely well endowed in all the right places, with a fit body honed through hard work. Her shoulder blades' long hair was of a beautiful light brown color, with shades of red all over it. Just the light of the candle made it look like there were flames dancing within. Seeing Mother with her hair down in a sunny day must be quite a sight to behold, Derek thought. Maybe it was because Lith was still a baby, maybe because of the mother-son bonding, but Lith felt deeply proud of her. He also discovered that she seemed to not use bra or underpants. Once finished dressing, she wrapped up Lith, making it impossible for him to move. Then Elena placed him into her sash, using it like a baby cradle so that she could easily hold him with only one arm with minimum exertion. She walked out the small bedroom and found her older daughter, Eliza, messing with the fireplace. "What in the great mother's name do you think you're doing, Lily? The sun is not even out. You should be sleeping. You know you are not allowed to mess with fire," she said with a hiss, trying to not wake up the house. "I'm sorry, Mom. I just wanted to make you all a surprise. Let you wake up in an already warm house and breakfast ready." Eliza's face showed only sincere concern. "There is no need to worry, silly bee. Your mommy is a pro with kids," Elena said while ruffling her hair. Eliza, together with her twin brother, was the eldest child. She was 8 years old, and her blonde hair with shades of black was the reason for her moniker. Elena shooed her away from the fireplace and with a flick of a finger lighted the fire. "Infero. Thanks heavens," Lith rejoiced. "Once again I had that weird feeling when discovering a new type of magic. This proves I wasn't just imagining stuff." Elena sent Lily opening the window's shutters to let the dawn light in while she prepared breakfast. Elena took several vegetables out of a cabinet and proceeded chopping them with a knife. Some had a familiar look to Lith, like some semi-potatoes and odd-colored carrots. The others were all a mystery. The idea of having such breakfast made Lith almost cry. In his past life, he never liked vegetables. They were all bland tasting. No matter how much of them he ate, within half an hour he would be hungry again. Elena shoved everything inside a small copper cauldron and with the help of a hook hanged it on a metal bar over the fire. Then with a finger snap she conjured water out of nowhere, filling the cauldron. Both Lith and Eliza were ecstatic, even though for completely different reasons. For Lith it meant hope. Spells could be casted without words or precise hands movements, and that showed him that there was a real chance for him to practice magic while still being baby. For Eliza was a reason for pride. Magic was common, but every time Elena casted a silent spell, it was like watching a real magician at work. "You are so amazing, Mom." Eliza's eyes were full of admiration. "Will I ever be as good as you with magic?" "Of course you will, silly bee," Elena replied with a kind smile, while inwardly adding, "after 10+ years of chores, every single day." After a while, everyone woke up to have breakfast together. The family consisted of Ra's father, Elena, 2 daughters, Eliza and Tista, and 2 sons, Orpal and Tryon. Lith could then establish with depressing certainty that there was no such a thing as an indoor bathroom. From what he could see, the house consisted of a big room used as dining room, kitchen, and pantry with 3 doors that lead to the various bedrooms and nothing else. The breakfast was relatively quiet, so he had no problems learning the word for water magic when his father filled some jugs. Joron! After everyone left for their daily routine, Elena moved along with Lith to a rocking chair. During the morning, he had the pleasure to discover that in the new world, the daily chores like washing the dishes or cleaning the floors were all performed using magic. From her rocking chair, Elena would simply twirl her index and medium finger while reciting Breza to generate up to 3 small whirlwinds that she would move all around the house to collect and get rid of the dust. Whenever someone would dirty the floor with earth or mud, a flick of the wrist and a magna would send them back through the same door they were brought in. Lith was delighted discovering how common the use of magic was. Everyone in the family, even the younger ones, would use magic to make their life easier. When bedtime arrived, Lith was dying to try some magic. He had waited so long for his hands and feet to be finally free. Elena fell asleep almost instantly. Yet Lith was impatient enough to have the impression of having waited for hours. After a full day of thinking, he had decided to try only air magic first until he was confident enough in his magic control abilities. Fire was just too dangerous for a novice, while water and light would easily wake up his mother. He could not spot any dirt to control in the dim light of the room and was too afraid to mess up with darkness magic until he got a better understanding of it. So he twirled his little arm and said, "Hey!" Nothing happened. Lith tried and failed countless times before giving up. He did not know how long his baby body would have lasted until falling asleep, so he stopped despairing and started thinking. Magic was common. Whenever he heard for the first time an elemental magic word, something inside him had clicked, like creating a connection with the elemental energy. Those were all good news, but he still couldn't make head or tails why he was always failing. He never expected succeeding at the first try, but he had thought that something would have manifested. A random tiny gust of wind, a magic spark, anything would do. So, he started thinking back to when the healer had filled him with power. That feeling was not new to him, but he never experienced it so intense. Lith searched his memory until he found the answer. It was the same sensation that he had when he started practicing Aikido while learning the basic breathing technique. Well, I have nothing to lose. Let's give it a try. Lith breathed in through his diaphragm, the anus relaxed, to get the world energy in. Then he would contract the anus, holding the breath for some seconds to let the energy settle in before breathing out, relaxing his whole body. Back on Earth, he had always thought that the intoxicating feeling he experienced during his first days of practice was just some kind of placebo effect. His naive young mind deluding itself that the weak could miraculously become strong just believing and practicing and all that key internal energy nonsense. But what if he later stopped experiencing that sensation only because his native world energy was just too thin? After some time, Lith started to feel a tingle all around his body, and then the energy seemed to move and condense inside his solar plexus. The more he performed the breathing technique, more clearly he could sense the energy getting more stable. In his old video games, mana was always blue. So he visualized a blue sphere settling in inside his solar plexus. After a while, Lith felt brimming with power. After holding his breath one last time, he twirled his little arm before commanding, "Air!" The wind generated barely tweaked his mother's hair while he had aimed for the blanket, yet he could not stop grinning. This is really a great start. In the following weeks, Lith's days consisted of a strict routine. During the day when he was all wrapped up, he would only focus on practicing the breathing technique and learning as much as he could about his family and their language. At night, he would practice magic until exhaustion made him fall asleep. Then, as soon as he woke up, he would start again until Alina would get up for the day. More than once he tried taking a break, but it would never last long. Living as a baby was not easy, on the contrary, was very stressful. He could not speak, even the words he had already understood to not scare his family. He could not move. He could do nothing but watch, sleep, eat, and relieve his bowels. He was not used to be so helpless and dependent on someone else for every little thing. Too much free time would bring him to the verge of insanity, so he would practice and practice, trying to adjust to his new reality without overthinking about how absurd and irrational was his situation. As Lith's powers increased, so did his control, and after a few weeks, he felt confident enough to try earth magic and water magic. He would always be careful, never conjuring more than a few droplets of water or manipulating a handful of dirt. He discovered that it was possible to make the elements float in mid-air, changing their shape and size by continuously spending mana. After that, he shifted his night training on focus and control rather than power. His mana was very limited, and he much preferred doing few elaborate tricks perfectly rather than a lot of stuff at the risk of blowing his cover. No matter how common magic was, Lith doubted that a baby practicing it would be any less than shocking or even terrifying. Lith was afraid of being abandoned by his family, or even worse, killed. He was once again scared of death, since now he had too much to lose. What were the odds to find another world where magic existed, to be born as a baby in a loving family? Zero, none, nada, squat. He had to play his cards well, and play them as close to the vest as possible. Before revealing even a hint of his talent, he needed to know what the standards of that world were. How much talent was considered good? How much divided being considered a genius from being labeled as a monster? His mind was constantly filled with worries, and only training would alleviate his anxiety. After 3 months, he had become good enough at silent magic to try fire magic on the fireplace. The fire was already lit, and when everyone was busy talking and eating during breakfast, he tried making the flames dance at will. It ended up in failure, since the flames were too strong, and the distance too big for his mana to have any effect. Yet he kept trying, since he could still sense the flow of magic going from himself to the fireplace, hence making it a good training to expand his mana sense and range. The only downside of all that training was that Lith would get hungry faster. Luckily, he was not Alina's first glutton, and she had no shortage of milk. Another month passed, and Alina started weaning him. This event was meaningful for 2 reasons. The first was Lith noticing that food wasn't abundant in his household, so even if he still had not a rich vocabulary, he could still read his parents' worried expressions every time he needed to be fed. Despite still being a cold-hearted, cynical misanthrope at his core, Lith could not help but feel guilty about it. They loved him like a child, while he would consider them nothing more than hosts, like a parasite. The only exceptions were Alina and Eliza, his big sister, the only one that along with his mother would take care of him. With their constant love, affection, and care had managed to crack his emotional defensive wall. The more time he spent with them, the more he would consider them part of his real family, not just people that he was leading by the nose. So, he started limiting his training to not exceed the amount of food they could afford. Even that required quite a few tries to find the right amount, since too little would cause even more worry than too much. The second reason were world-changing discoveries. Being forced to stop training magic as much as possible, Lith now had free time that he used to dedicate that time by practicing the breathing technique that he christened accumulation. That way, his inner energy, that he had long dubbed as mana core, grew faster to the point of hitting a bottleneck. Apparently, his body wasn't big or strong enough, or both, to hold an indefinite amount of mana. Lith never noticed before because his baby body was rapidly growing, and he had only so much time to expand the mana core. So, without realizing it, his body and mana core had developed together. But now the balance had been broken. and practicing accumulation would make every fiber of his body ache, so he was forced to stop. Luckily, he was still well fed and developing fast, so despite not being able doing any physical exercise, the bottlenecks would not last long. The second discovery was the result of him being forced not to practice magic or use accumulation while studying his bottleneck status. He found out that it was possible to modify the breathing technique by removing the breath-holding step. That way, the world energy would just flow in and out his body, energizing him like a good night's sleep. Lith named this new technique invigoration. After several tries, he discovered that the world's mana could allow him to stay awake for several days, but not indefinitely. Each time he would use invigoration, the energizing effect would last less and less, and only sleeping would reset its effectiveness. But the most important discovery, as almost always happens, was made by chance. After adjusting his food intake, Lith's greatest enemy had become the hunger, not the slight appetite that can be fixed by a candy bar or the hankering after a busy morning. It was the kind of hunger that never goes away, always lurking, even right after a meal. Even though Lith was not starving, it was something that he had never experienced. Even among all the misfortunes of his first life, food had never been an issue. He had always been able to eat to his heart's content, even allowing himself to be picky about food. But now he was so hungry that he ate until the last bite, and if his body had allowed him to, he would not hesitate licking the plate clean. In the good days, when the portions were larger, it was like white noise, annoying, but easily ignored. But during the bad days, either because the rations were smaller or because he had lost himself in the practice of magic consuming too much mana, it would become a thorn in his head. He would be so hungry to have a headache all day long, often feeling lightheaded and incapable of focusing. Food would be the only thing he would think or dream about. Of course, he was not the only hungry one in the family. Aside from Alina, only his siblings Orpal and Eliza would be tasked to feed him. And while Eliza had a big heart and strived to be like her mother, Orpal was angrier and hungrier by the day. He would often daydream about the days when he and his twin were the only children in the house. Now not only he had to fight each day for his parents' attention, but also for the food, clothes, and so on. Once he had a room only for himself, then he had to share it with Tryon. It was just a matter of time before Lith would come to take away what little personal space he still had. Orpal could not understand why a family as poor as his own would keep making kids. It was winter, so there was not much work to do. Hence, there weren't many occasions to restock their food supplies, and they had to last until spring. It was the toughest time of the year for all the farmers' families, since the food was meant not only for men but also for the animals. Orpal was sick of seeing Lith gobbling all the food, to the point of dubbing him Leech. So, whenever it was his turn to feed the little vermin, he would take some spoonful for himself. But Lith was not easily bullied. As soon as he noticed the spoon was not aimed to him, he would start to cry madly, and Alina would run to his side, foiling Orpal's plan. Lith never cried, unless he needed to be fed or changed, and that made their parents both really happy and paranoid about him. Since he would never cry wolf, they took every wail very seriously. That day was a really bad day for Lith, starving because of his growth spurt, and was Orpal's turn to take care of him. Both their parents were out. One of the cows seemed to suffer from frostbite. So Orpal took the plate full of creamy soup for the baby and gulped down a full spoonful. Lith immediately started to cry, but there was no one to hear him. Cry all you want. Leech Lith was now able to understand most of the common words, included Orpal's mockery. Today is just you and I. No mom in a shining armor to come to your rescue. After saying that, he gulped down another one. Lith felt like he was going crazy. Once again, he was helpless, his so-called magic useless in time of need. What could he possibly do, aside from blowing his cover? Ventilate him? Wet him? Using fire was too dangerous. A single meal was not worthy burning down a house. Lith's hunger was eating him, and his rage went above and beyond what he would have ever thought possible. "You fool!" he yelled inwardly. Feeling so tough robbing a child? Then he saw the third spoonful, making a good half of his meal gone, moving toward Orpal's smug face. Lith's anger reached a new peak, his hatred burning like a fire. "You are not my brother!" he yelled inwardly. "You are nothing but a filthy thief trash!" And then, more than clicking, he felt something breaking inside like a dam that could not hold the raging waters anymore. "I hope you choke on that spoon, you Lith waved his arm against Orpal in a final struggle, and then it happened. Lith felt the mana going out to his body, reaching the spoon already in Orpal's mouth, and pushing it down, hard. Orpal started to choke, and after removing the spoon from his throat, he started puking. Lith was so astonished to almost forget about both his rage and hunger. He had discovered something wonderful, a power that no one else in his family seemed to have. Lith had discovered spirit magic. At that time, Elena and Ra's father were coming back to the house. Upon hearing Lith's desperate cries, they ran back to check on him. When they found Orpal on the ground, puking, they understood what had happened. They already had suspicions since whenever Orpal fed Lith, he was always hungrier than usual. But now they had proof. Inside the pool of vomit, the undigested creamy soup was as clear as the day. Raz became red with anger. "You little," but had to stop. His other children had returned as well. "I am very disappointed in you, Orpal," said Elena, seeing that her hubby was too angry to speak. "From now on, Elena will be the one feeding Lith. You can take all her shifts in the stable, since I don't think that even you could eat hay." "But Mom," Orpal said, trying to defend himself. He hated cows and their smell. "No buts, young man," Raz yelled. "And that is not punishment enough. Elena, feel free to prepare one more bowl for Lith and take the food from Orpal's share. He must learn that bad actions have consequences." They were speaking too fast for Lith, and there were too many unknown words. But Orpal had just turned pale, so it had to be good news. Orpal started crying and apologizing, but Lith made sure to cry louder, so Raz and Elena both ignored his pleas and sent him to take care of the animals. After being fed with a generous serving of soup and milk, Lith could finally focus on what had happened. After days of trial and error experiments, he had grasped the basics of his newfound ability and gained a much deeper understanding of magic. Lith had discovered that when he casted an elemental spell, it actually consisted in a three-step process. First, he would emit the mana, then he had to mix it with the world energy that he was trying to manipulate. The last step was the hardest one, controlling the spell and its effects. Spirit magic skipped the second step. It used only his own power, without borrowing elemental energy. That made it more difficult than any magic he had practiced so far and more mana-consuming. It also required much more focus compared to normal magic. Pure mana had no physical form, so he could not rely on his eyes for manipulating its effects. All depended on his willpower and imagination. The clearer was the mental image of the action he wanted the mana to make, the better the result. The range was also very limited, barely reaching a meter 328 feet radius. Despite all its strict limitations, Lith started to practice anything but spirit magic. The ultimate discovery about it was that every improvement he did in spirit magic was also passed on all other kinds of magic. He didn't need to switch practicing between them anymore, and so he progressed in leap and bounds compared to before. From time to time, he would use a random elemental magic to check on his progress, reaching a new understanding of the profoundness of that element. The progress Lith made allowed him to also improve his breathing techniques. Through accumulation, he could now not only perceive how his mana core changed in size with practice, but also have a rough understanding of the amount of mana contained in his body. Using accumulation, he would feed the world energy to his mana core, allowing it to expand from the size of a pinhead to that of a glass marble. Once the mana core grew to marble size, further progress could only be made when the physical body forcefully compressed the mana core back to pinhead. Lith had no idea how the phenomenon worked, and had found no way around it. Mana core and body development had to go hand in hand. There was no shortcut. Bottlenecks happened when Lith tried to use accumulation when the mana core was still at its peak size. The world energy bottle. The world energy would be rejected by the mana core, going wild through his body and damaging it. By continuously undergoing expansion and compression cycles, his mana capacity was already incomparable to when he was just a newborn. After discovering and practicing spirit magic, Lith had a much finer control of his mana, inside and outside his body. He managed to modify the invigoration technique so that when he breathed in the world mana, he would combine it with his own, temporarily exceeding his limits. Then he would expand the resulting energy, moving it from the solar plexus outwards until even his body hair would be overflowing with mana. Ever since he invented invigoration, he had noticed qualitative changes to his body. Lith was now better at withstanding cold and heat, and he would hardly ever get sick. When his whole family would catch a cold, he would either get over it before the symptoms manifested or recover in a few days. Unless it's all a crazy coincidence, improving invigoration is the only mean at my disposal to temper my body. If I am right, this means that I can use it as a crutch until I get big enough to do physical activity, he thought. Hopefully, it should also help me overcome my bottleneck periods faster. It's a gamble, but it shouldn't do any harm. Also, between hunger and bottlenecks, there isn't much I can do as a 7-month-old baby. As for his family life, it also experienced some changes during the following months. After the soup incident with Orpal, a divide opened between the brothers. Lith was vengeful by nature, and so was his brother. Sometimes, when Orpal was angry, would call him Leech instead of Lith, since he always called him like that in his mind. Every slip of the tongue would cost him a serious scolding, and when he did it while harshly arguing with his parents, even a good spanking. Orpal blamed Lith for all of his misfortunes. The little runt always giggled when he was having a hard time. The relationship between Lith and his parents instead kept getting better and better. He had already started saying babble words, making sure to say mama when Alina embraced him and dada whenever Raz came near him. If this world is even a bit similar to Earth's middle age, it is better to stay in my old man's good book until I am self-sufficient. This was Lith's reasoning. He was still very afraid of father figures, and the two of them didn't had much a relationship anyway. Raz would always be busy with something, letting his wife and eldest daughter spend the most time with the baby. To his defense, he had just wrongly assumed that Lith was too little to notice, and that they would have time catch up later in the future, like he did with his other sons. Raz really loved him, and Lith never ceased to amaze him. He couldn't remember him crying for no reason, not even when teething. If someone bumped into his cradle or raised his voice while Lith was asleep, or at least pretending to, he would not make a sound, just look around before going back to sleep. Lith increasingly grew fond of Eliza. It was more like a loving aunt than a sister to him. He could see himself in her, taking care of her little brother like he did with Carl. He would have loved to express this love, but all he could do was smile and laugh as soon as he saw her, and call her Lala. She was in fact the only one, beside his parents, to have a babble name. It wasn't much, but it meant the world to her. And so, time went by. After 6 months from his arrival, Lith was put on the ground for the 5th time and started to crawl under strict supervision. At the 9th month, he started to walk and graduated himself from babble words to real ones. On the day of his birthday, after discovering they had birthdays in that world too, he allowed himself to use simple phrases and started to make questions to complete his vocabulary. Knowing nothing about babies, it was very stressful finding the right timing for every little thing. Luckily, Lith could always resort on cheating to find out the proper time for him to learn to do something. He was already capable of understanding most of what he could hear, so he would always be open to suggestions. If Alina was dying for him to finally say, "Mommy," instead of "Mama," he would wait a couple of days before making it happen. If Raz cheered for Lith running to him, he did. The real problem was paying attention to everything Raz, Eliza, and Alina said while being seemingly completely oblivious about their words. Another problem was that once they let him roam free in the dining room, they gave him also small wooden toys expecting him to play and explore his surroundings. Lith already knew the dining room as the back of his hand, and there was not much to see in the first place. Yet he had to pretend to be curious about it. That was the hardest thing he had ever done since becoming a baby, and scared him to death. He had no clue how a child would explore such bland environment, and his paranoia about blowing his cover made him sweating bullets. Seeing the expectation in their eyes, he started from the nearest thing, the fireplace. The fire was not lit. The logs were cold and covered in ashes. When he got closer, Roz stopped him. "This is the fireplace. Now is safe, but fire is bad. Fire hurts. No touching it, never." Lith looked at him, seemingly confused before trying to put his hand in the ashes. Roz grabbed his hand, blocking him. "Fire is bad. No touching it, never," his father repeated. Lith stared in his eyes like he was deeply in thought before asking, "Fire bad?" "Yes, very bad," Roz replied while nodding. "Okay." Lith moved away from the fireplace and got close to the table. When he tried climbing up a chair, almost falling down with it, Elena ran to his rescue. Good gods, this little one sure likes danger. Seeing their increasingly worried expressions, Lith believed to have found a way out that torment. He would keep putting himself in danger, trying to climb on the table, and going into the kitchen rummaging through pots and knives. Quickly they decided that adventure time was over. They made him sit on an old cloth spreaded over the wooden floor and gave him toys to play with while they recovered from the stress. He had a little wooden horse, some kind of cart, and an odd-looking dog thingy. Playing was much easier to him. Lith did not need to create stories or explaining what he was doing. He could just use playtime to practice spirit magic. Lith would actually never use his hands to move the toys, making them float as close as possible to his fingers. He really enjoyed those moments. Lith could finally openly rejoice, scream, and laugh anytime he made a new discovery or a breakthrough, and all his parents would see was a happy child lost in his fantasies. Who would have ever thought that such a quiet little fellow could have such a vivid imagination? Raz said with a big, proud smile on his face. Look at him. All he has is just some old toys, yet it looks like he has the whole world in the palm of his hand. The following years weren't easy on Lith. He was finally allowed to do a lot of questions, filling most of the holes in his vocabulary and starting to finally learn about his family and the new world. He learned that they were living in the village of Lutia, that was part of the county of Lustria, which in turn was part of the Griffin Kingdom. His parents knew about the neighboring countries by name, but that was it. They knew nothing about the life outside the village, nor they cared about it. In their eyes, the king was some sort of mythical beast. They put all their faith and worries in Count Lutia. Not only he administered justice and taxes in the county, he would also always take part in Lutia's spring festival as the guest of honor. His parents never mentioned to their children anything about magic, wars, or history. They only told them tales that could be easily dismissed as bedtime stories, even in this new world. All of their stories were filled with beautiful princesses, valiant heroes, and villainous tyrants. Lith was truly dissatisfied by such little information. He wanted to know what was the planet's name, what was the stage of scientific development it had developed. He wanted to learn about the history of magic, the lore, the legends, anything that could give him at least a clue about what to expect from life. But it was clear they knew little more than gossip, so he could not make questions he was not even supposed to think about. At least his family tree was much easier to fully understand. Elena and Raz had married very early, even by village standards, barely 16. Raz, being an only child, had inherited his father's farm, where they were currently living. Elena got pregnant shortly after the marriage, giving birth to the twins Eliza and Orpel. Then she got pregnant again every 2 years. That meant that Raz and Elena were currently 25 years old, Eliza and Orpel 8 years old, Tryon 6 years old, Tista 4 years old, and finally Lith 2 years old. In fact, most of the information were leached from his siblings' questions. Lith was mostly limited to a "what's this? Why is that?" kind of question. Spending more and more time with the rest of the family, he also discovered why, despite his father owned such a nice farm with its own barn and hen house, had so much problems putting food on the table. Tista was born with a congenital condition that prevented her from doing any physical exertion and made her also prone to illness. Fast pacing was enough to leave her out of breath. She would chaw from time to time, and when things were about to turn for the worse, the cough would become violent. At that point, one of her parents would have to run to the village to let Nana visit and heal her. But she could not really cure her, only alleviate the symptoms and return her to her natural state. And while a checkup wasn't expensive, the treatment was. Also, even if Raz did go picking her up and then brought Nana back home, it would still cost an extra. Doing a round trip meant her losing business, so she required compensation. It was the constant need for the healer to put such a strain on their budget. Lith felt very sorry for her. Despite not having spent much time with Tista, she was precious for both Alina and Eliza, and that was more than enough to make her precious for him too. He felt helpless, cursing his inability to ever practice light and darkness magic. Light magic required a patient, and until he had gained a solid grasp of how it worked and what was this world's human anatomy, he would not dare putting anyone's health at risk. Darkness magic was another story. Lith had only seen it once, no one in his family used it, and even in that one occasion he had clearly felt the destructive power it held. He was also biased against it, since on Earth dark magic would always be associated with evil practices and undeads, so he had no desire to dabble with something potentially horrifying. Lith could only live on, hoping to eventually get some training in magic, while enduring the madness that he was getting used to call family life. He had to be lively, but not too much. He had to be curious, but not too much. He had to run around but never get out of the door. His parents were never satisfied. If he tried to sit in corner meditating, they would worry because he was too quiet or too lazy. If he tried to move around or help them, he would be scolded for getting in the way. They refused to teach him chore magic. That was the name of the lesser spells they used on their daily life, and prohibited him to learn them. Lith could not go outside without being accompanied by someone, could not get near to the fireplace, could not make too many questions. Everything was basically prohibited until he grew up. More than once Lith wanted to scream, "I may be biologically young, but I am actually the oldest in here, damn it," but all he could do was suck it up and obey. His feud with Orpol never resolved, and he could clearly feel Trion's hostility on his brother's behalf. Clearly Orpol was for Trion what Eliza was for Lith, his role model. Unlike Orpol, Trion would not completely ignore him, even when their parents were absent. But Lith could clearly see that every time his brother helped him, it was just to be polite. There was no kindness between them. Lith quickly started ignoring him in return. "I have already spent half of my old life being worried about dysfunctional family members. Been there, done that. So thank you, but no thank you. If you want to be a jerk, be my guest. I don't give a damn about you." These were his thoughts about the matter, so he let things fester. Once he became 3 years old, he could not take it anymore. The boredom caused by the cold winter months where he was basically stuck at home 24/7, aggravated by the constant hunger, was about to drive him insane. It was a stormy afternoon, and the family was gathered around the fireplace. Alina was teaching her daughters how to sew. Raz was teaching Orpal how to carve wood, while Trion and Lith were only allowed to watch. They were still too little to handle any sharp object. Even sewing was off limits. Lith had already asked, baffling his father and flattering her mother. "You are too little, and your hands are still too clumsy," she replied. And Alina was right. Lith's body felt even clumsier than his old one before he started practicing martial arts. Just the thought of all the lost muscle memory was enough to make him cry. So, he patiently waited that Raz finished instructing Orpal, and then Lith mustered all his courage and asked him to teach him how to read, write, and count. Raz was flabbergasted. "You are too young. Usually kids wait until they are 6 years old to go to school and learn. Don't you think it's boring?" That was the philosophy every man in his lineage had always upheld. Boring? What could possibly be more boring than sit here doing nothing, like yesterday and the day before? And probably tomorrow too. "Please, Daddy, try me. I beg you, please, please, please." Raz didn't know how to say no. Lith had never asked him anything before. Even when he is clearly still hungry, if he notices there is no more food, he never asks for more. He thought, unlike Orpal, "I don't know if it's Lith that is too good, or I'm just spoiling Orpal too much." He really wanted a way out, but Alina was already staring at him. Her hands never stopped sewing, her mouth explaining the girls what they were doing wrong, but her eyes were clearly set on him. Damn it, what can I say? Learning does not even require dangerous tools. That's it. The tools. I'm such a moron sometimes. Raz looked in Lith's puppy eyes, his heart squeezed as in a vice, but he still replied, "I'm sorry, son. We have nothing you could possibly ride on. So, I can't teach you." Lith had considered things through before asking, so he had already a solution at hand. He picked the biggest tray they had and filled it with the ashes collected in a bucket beside the fireplace. Now we can write as much as we want. Raz was amazed by Lith's ingenuity, and so was Alina. He was about to object again when he noticed that the stare had turned into a frown. Her hands were moving too fast, and that meant trouble for him. There was a storm outside. He could not run away from the one that was brewing inside. So, with a deep sigh, he gave up. From what do you want to start? Raz could only hope that Lith would get bored fast and let him return to his leisure. Count, Lith promptly replied. So Raz sat on the floor beside him and started drawing lines in the ash. Lith was ecstatic. The numbers they used had a different shape from the Arabic numerals, but aside from that, they were identical in use. Even the calculation methods were the same. So, he kept the new numbers in the upper row to learn their shape, and then started doing the multiplication tables. He could actually do such simple math in his head, but he needed to engrave the new numbers in both his mind and body. Once he finished, Lith started taking requests from his audience, and when Orpal sarcastically asked, "How much is 124 times 11?" he quickly replied with flat 1,364, leaving them all speechless. Alina could not help herself standing up and lifting Lith up in a big hug. "Your favorite stories on NOVL.com. My little genius, I'm so proud of you." In less than 1 hour, he had mastered what it would take others a full year to do. Eliza and Tista soon joined her in the embrace, congratulating their little brother, while the male side of the family was still flabbergasted. In rural areas, they learned how to count only to not get ripped off when they sold or bought merchandise. So, they remembered only addition and subtraction, letting the useless multiplications and divisions fade away in their minds. Reading and writing required more time, but it was equally simple. Lith already knew most of the words and how to spell them. He only needed to learn the alphabet and memorize it to be able to read and write. Once again, his family was stunned, and the only one not rejoicing with them was Orpal, left alone with his envy and scorn.